Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Content Marketing Institute's weekly Wednesday webinar. This is a place where we like to gather great marketers and help you become even better. So thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Stahl, General Manager for CMI. We're coming to you live today, and we're so happy to see so many of you from around the globe really joining us today. We've got a great discussion. We're going to be talking about machine learning and how to use data to personalize the customer journey. So get ready to take some great notes. Before I turn it over to our expert speakers, very quickly have a look at this slide. You can ask questions at any time. Look for the Q&A box on the console. Just put it in there, hit submit. Those come right to us, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. The slides will advance automatically. You don't need to do anything. If you'd like a copy of the slides, though, just look for the widget at the bottom of the console where you can download the slides there and some other assets as well. If you get distracted today or you have to step away and you want to watch this again tomorrow, no worries. We're going to send you a link to the on-demand version. It'll be in your mailbox in about 24 hours or so you can give it another look or you can share it with your colleagues. And as always, we love it when you get involved in the conversation. If you'd like to share what you're learning with your social media community, please do. Just please use hashtag CMWorld so we can see it. I'd love to see you over on Twitter. Okay, joining us today, we have Tyler Norris, who is the Senior Data Scientist at Bounteous. Hello, Tyler.
Hey, good afternoon.
Welcome. And Eric Fullerton, who is the lead product evangelist at Acquia. Hello, Eric. Welcome.
Thank you. Afternoon.
All right. I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'll see you in just a little bit for some audience Q&A.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. So as we kind of just kicked off, thinking about machine learning and the personalizing of our, different customer journeys. When when Tyler and I were talking and having a conversation about what we wanted to discuss today, this is a really important and relevant topic to hopefully a lot of you, not just on the line, but really, we're having conversations like this every day about how to unlock machine learning for not just those data science teams, but marketers and people who might, like myself, maybe aren't the most technical in the world. So we have a really good agenda, nice agenda for you here today. We're going to talk a little bit around some of the kind of terms you commonly hear in machine learning. And we're going to actually talk about how you can apply the different algorithms and models and actually how they drive value. So getting really tangible in terms of what machine learning can do for marketers. We'll talk a little bit about measurement because we always want to make sure that, from a reporting and measuring perspective, we're doing the right things. It's absolutely critical for marketers. We are always conscious of data and the effectiveness of all of the different activities that we're doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about some ways with specific products or other ideas and kind of strategies across your business that you can try to unlock that machine learning. We'll close it out with some key takeaways there. And, as I mentioned, machine learning is this kind of large amorphous space, and there's lots of different terminology out there. There's lots of different articles every day that I hear and see where everyone is always talking about machine learning, but it's not often really well and clearly defined. And I'm Eric Fullerton. I'm lead product evangelist at Acquia, but I am kind of the marketer in this conversation. So I am very similar to many of you on the line. And when we were thinking about this, we realized there's no way we can have this conversation just marketer to marketer. We needed to bring in the experts. And that is what Tyler is here for. He is obviously someone who knows a tremendous amount about machine learning. I learned a lot just in a couple of conversations with him. So Tyler, if you want to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Eric. Hi, guys. My name is Tyler Norris. I'm a senior data scientist at Bounteous, also leading COVID hair advocate, which I only mention because I still laugh every time I see this picture. But yeah, more seriously, I've been working in digital marketing analytics for I think, about 9 years now. And the key there is, specifically digital marketing analytics, right? So, we've seen a lot of these applications, things that we'll talk about here today. So I've worked in machine learning and AI applications related to search engine optimization, paid media budget management, things like that. But really specifically lately focusing on this idea of user level data and activating on user level data with machine learning models. So really excited to have this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. And I think it's a good transformation from picture to video today. So I like it. And kind of as Tyler was speaking, a little bit about his journey, I've been a marketer. I was running, global marketing programs, trying to make sense of all the data and accounts that we had, creating lots of great content, trying to create and map these customer journeys. And there's this constant feeling of challenge around everything being very manual and everything being very rules-based and a lot of guesswork. And since I've been in my long tenure, I suppose you could say, at Acquia, really thinking about personalizing experiences, so how to personalize experiences on the web and even beyond. And then really my most recent focus has been around customer data, understanding that customer data, but then really how to unlock it and how to activate it to make marketers' jobs easier every single day, because that's the point of what we're trying to accomplish when it comes to data, when it comes to machine learning. These can be very complex topics, but their overall goal is to help us as marketers do our jobs easier. So as I mentioned, I work at Acquia. We're an open source digital experience company. We help some of the largest brands and organizations in the world manage, host, and run all of their digital properties and applications. But we have 4,000 customers across multiple different sectors in federal government and EDU, as well as some of those enterprise customers I was talking about. And we have our Drupal cloud, which is based in our open source, a kind of a value around being able to bring open source to the enterprise, hosting websites, managing multi-site experiences. But our most kind of recent and energetic focus has been around customer data platforms, and personalization. We've made a lot of great progress. And part of that great progress is actually due in part to Bounteous, who has, they're a tremendous partner of ours. They've got a ton of great expertise over there. And some of our most successful customers at Acquia are the ones that we have jointly. So Tyler, if you want to say a little bit about Bounteous and who you guys are.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Bounteous, we're really a team of engineers, analysts, marketers, data scientists, specializing in sort of really creating those experiences, working with our clients, starting back at strategy, using tools like Acquia and Drupal to build those experiences, and then really with our analysts and data scientists, measuring and optimizing. So yeah, we have offices throughout North America here, as you see here on the slide, specifically in this analytics and advertising space. We do trainings throughout the country fairly regularly, 1,000 plus apparently. I'm learning and reading this slide. So this starting with analytics and insights is really sort of in our DNA, I would say. And to add to that, there's one more concept that's sort of core to Bounteous, but also core to what we're going to talk about here today. So I thought I would bring it up here. We really emphasize this concept called digital flow, which is this idea of starting with strategy before we even get into design, right? So strategy leads to building brand experiences, which leads to analytics and insight, which is sort of a pretty common model that I'm sure most of us are familiar with. But where things get a little bit more interesting from our perspective and where we can sort of work with tools like Acquia is this idea of multi-moment orchestration, where we take this analysis and insight and sort of supercharge it into sort of more real-time personalization. This happens not only through sort of working with analysts at Bounteous, but also through automated tools and building in these machine learning models we'll talk about today.
Awesome, thank you. So as we're gonna get started, and when I was thinking about kind of this whole presentation, I keep coming back to the idea that machine learning might be the biggest buzzword in the market today. And everyone wants to say machine learning. They always want to talk about it. And it's a little bit harder than you would think, actually, to get a really good and clean definition about machine learning. And one of the ways I wanted to kind of start this is there's a couple different things that I thought we could talk through. But the first is just, Tyler, can you just walk us through a really clean, understandable definition of machine learning?
Yeah, and I love this question, and we talked about this a little bit before, Eric. I think one of my favorite things to do is take the idea of what we do in machine learning and data science and really strip a lot of the complication away and talk about it for this sort of simple concept that it really is. So I start off here with what would be more of a textbooky definition of machine learning on the top, and a true sort of understandable definition below. So what we're doing is we're using algorithms to relearn and understand data, so that we can, and here's the key word, predict and classify new data. Now, what that means in more common and more sort of, understandable language is there are these sort of repeatable methods for understanding and interpreting data. That's sort of the model thing. We won't go really too deeply into like sort of how mathematical models work here today. But the key here is really so that we can guess whether these relationships exist in new data. And I'll start off here with like a really high level example. We have a bunch of sort of maybe in a CRM data about our customers, and that's where they live in the world, or how many purchases, or whether or not they've purchased from us, how many emails they've opened, how many times they've been to our website. We know though whether those users have purchased or not purchased. So let's take maybe some new data from new users and guess whether or not those users will purchase. And that's really at the core level what we're talking about with machine learning. Take data we know and understand and have seen and try to apply it to new data.
Awesome, thank you. It's kind of like there's almost like the Gartner definition of there, and then kind of like the how do we use it every day type of definition. So thanks for that. And then as we keep defining, right, so that's good at a high level, but there's a couple other terms that we hear a lot, right? So we hear AI a lot. We also hear machine learning a lot. And then now we're also we're hearing around deep learning, right? So these are kind of like three separate terms. So I'm hoping you could walk us through that. And then the other piece of it is, we hear about different types of learning. Some learning is supervised, some learning is unsupervised. So can you just kind of take us through those two things, maybe break it down for us a little bit for those two definitions?
Yeah, and the AI versus machine learning versus deep learning is a really funny one for us, even as data scientists. We'll kind of hear people using these terms, and we'll think to ourselves, what do they really mean by AI in this case? So this is sort of, I think, a good opportunity for us to like strip away some of the marketing speak from these terms and talk about them for kind of what they really are here. I'll say, first of all, this is not a graphic that we sort of invented. This is something that if you've done any research on these topics, you may have even seen this particular graphic before. But it does summarize the landscape pretty well. Our outer ring here being artificial intelligence can really kind of mean any decision that a human would normally make made by a computer in some way. And yeah, that does encompass this sort of machine learning, algorithmic, learning that we're talking about here. But it also relates to sort of heuristic-based models. Like, so think of, for example, our old school or maybe more traditional lead scoring models where user downloads a white paper, so we're going to give them 10 points. That could be artificial intelligence, for example. Going down into that next level, machine learning, is where we're specifically talking about this use of algorithms. Hey, let's take data that we've seen, learn, interpret, understand the relationships, and make a prediction. That's really where we'll focus today. That's kind of, the right level of depth, I think. The last one here then becomes deep learning. And deep learning is this like new sort of, not new, but trendy in terms of we're hearing it used a lot more lately and thrown around a lot more lately. So I think it's really important to understand clearly what that means. And deep learning specifically is a subset or a group of machine learning models that are called neural networks, really. And they're called deep learning because there are these sort of layers of interpretation that the model goes through. Again, we don't want to get into too much detail about exactly how machine learning models work, except for to say that when we're talking about deep learning, we should really know that we're talking about that specific subset called neural networks. And maybe we don't throw that term around otherwise. So I think the takeaway here is machine learning as a broad umbrella category of algorithmic learning is a good way to think about what we'll talk about here today.
Awesome, thanks. I feel like the AI versus machine learning is a tale of as old as time. So thanks for breaking that one down. Then next is supervised versus unsupervised. Oh no, please.
Yeah, not to put too fine of a point on the AI term as sort of a broad umbrella, but I think a lot of times we can think of if we just see the term AI, it maybe doesn't even necessarily mean anything that fancy or complicated. It just means decision making at the end of the day. Yeah,
exactly.
So again, to your question here about supervised versus unsupervised, I like to say here that this is as complicated as we're going to get. So if you feel like we're trending towards like more data science-y class-oriented sort of things. Like this is as detailed as we get, and we're going to pull it back up to that strategic level from here. We called this particular distinction out because some of the examples that we're going to go through here today are all going to be either supervised or unsupervised learning. And as long as we sort of understand what these basic high-level models are doing, I think it provides a level of clarity here. So on the left side here, if we think about supervised learning, this is kind of that example that I talked about before a little bit, where we have a bunch of data and we know what we want to predict. I gave the example of, hey, will a user purchase or will they not purchase? We can teach an algorithm or we can teach a model to predict that for us. This example here, this sort of really simple, relatable example, is related to vehicles, right? I know what a bus is, and I know what a pickup truck is, and I know what the attributes related to those are. So I can teach a model to find those attributes and tell me exactly when it sees a pickup truck. On the right side, on the other hand, is unsupervised, which is really this idea of, hey, I have a bunch of data, I have a bunch of features or columns or things that I know about my users, and I just want to find relationships between them. I'm not really quite sure what I'm looking for, but I know that there's meaningful relationships. And this is a great example because, Legos, first of all, who can't relate to Legos? Like even as you're learning how to play with Legos as a very small child, right? I see that these are blue, and I know that that is a meaningful relationship that these are all blue, or these all have 6 pegs, so those are alike. The trick with these that we call sort of clustering algorithms or finding these relationships is like, what does that mean? What do we do with that? Now that we have all the blue Legos, we have to figure out what to do. And I think we'll go through some of those applications here coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that we went through the most complex part of what we're going to go through today, and we're looking at Legos and trucks, is a good sign. So thank you for walking us through that. I appreciate it. But now that we've kind of gotten through some of the definitions and differences between some of these common terms, I know we really want to get to kind of like some of these practical applications. So we'll talk a little bit about, what is so you said that, we're talking about the differences between deep learning and machine learning. We're talking about AI too. So I know we kind of just like, as I'm thinking about it, it's like, what are some of the ways that you would use that unsupervised learning versus supervised learning, just kind of in a common way that a marketer might think through it every single day? Yeah,
and then this is a pretty common question for us, and I think relating back to that sort of textbook definition versus a more relatable definition, we can translate that directly to how we would apply that to a marketing strategy. We have web analytics data. Who's not using Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics or HubSpot or something like that to get data back, right? So I have all of this data on who predicts or who will purchase or who didn't purchase on my website. I know how many page views they had. I know how often they bounced. So I can predict if they will or will not purchase, if users will or will not purchase in the future. Moving on here to another example, email, right? We all are sending out emails. So if I have thousands of users who I've sent emails to, I've sent 1, 2, 3 emails with various subjects, various content, I can predict how likely that user is to click on one of those emails, come back to my website. The one on the right here so those would be both supervised. The one on the right here, example 3, takes us to a more unsupervised example. Blogs, right? We all have a lot of different content on our blogs. Hopefully we're using page types or content categories to basically sort of help understand what an individual page is about. I can look at all of the users on my website, which content they view, and sort of put them in common groups. Maybe, and this is one that we'll go into more detail here coming up. Maybe they look at product-related content most of the time and event-related content sometimes, and there's a meaningful relationship between those two. And we can figure out what to do with that.
Cool. Awesome. That's great. I love the examples. And then I think in a little bit, there's a couple of other things that we wanted to work through first, but then we're actually going to get into those like really substantive applications, a use case, kind of a way to measure that, and then kind of the outcome too. So we're gonna add on to what we just talked about at a high level in just a second. But before we do so, right, I'm sure we have multiple different folks online. Maybe they're different parts of their kind of machine learning journey. Maybe some, they know that people are using it in their organization today, but they don't really know what that's about. maybe they've heard that they want to do more with machine learning, and they're going to be thinking through that and working on a team to do it. Or maybe they're someone who has really very little sense of kind of the entire machine learning, maturity landscape. And I thought that one of the things that you talked about that was really interesting is like what that traditional path is on maturity around machine learning. And then as we think about it at a team level, maybe not who's required, but what would be an optimal team or group of people in an organization to be thinking about machine learning and helping to bring that to life?
Yeah. So I think that this is, most of what we're talking about here with applications is the what. Now we need to talk about the how and who a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing that I like to mention here is that, I think a lot of times there's an expectation that it's like, cool, we're doing machine learning now, we're bought in, like I'm a marketer, I hit a button and now everything goes and I can just sit back and drink my coffee. Unfortunately, I can say from experience and from doing this, with a lot of different organizations and different verticals, that's just unfortunately not the case, right? There is this level of maturity that every organization moves along. And I think this is an important visualization for two reasons. One, because it sort of illustrates this foundation that we all have to start from, right? We're going to talk about marketing strategy more than once here today. Every machine learning model that's in production really should start with this idea of, hey, I have uncovered something or found something in analysis to say that, user meets X threshold and Y threshold. And then we sort of build that segment based off of heuristics and build on it and grow until eventually, we can build a model that applies to that particular sort of use case or challenge, but that was rooted in some sort of strategy. So I think that that's sort of the most important thing here. So from here, So I think the maturity is important. Knowing that this happens over time is one thing, but how do we get there, right? So these four roles, we talk about these commonly, like traditionally, as four roles that we would want to employ or have available to us to really do machine learning at scale. But these roles represent functions, right? So, we have, cool icons with who would normally do these things. But I think our marketing tech stack typically can meet some of these functions or achieve some of these functions for us without having dedicated roles. This is one thing that I harp on in other talks that I've done, is kind of this idea that that working within an individual tech stack and having tools available to us can make it easier to achieve some of these things and not necessarily have to have access to engineers and our sort of developers all the time. But we do specifically put the marketing strategist here along the left side. It's the most important role, we think, when it comes to achieving sort of personalization at scale within our marketing channels, right? Because without having that foundation of why we want to do this, some objective that we're trying to achieve, there's really no use for a model down funnel anyway. And we know that because we've tried it, right? We've had organizations come to us and say, like, look, machine learning's great, we need to do machine learning. And we're like, okay, so we'll build you a cool model that does things and gives you an output. And then, we're not quite sure what to do with it. So we do need marketing strategists. There's no way to get around that one. Data engineers, though, is really the key here is the function. We need a good pipeline. The more channels that we have that communicate, that I can join data back and forth across from, my web analytics, my CRM, my CDP, the more that I can bring those channels together and have a good depth of data, the more I can do and the more meaningful my predictions out of my machine learning model will be at the end of the day. The other one that I'll mention here, spend just a few seconds on, is this idea of marketing analysis or marketing analysts. This is a common roadblock that we see where, one, we need strategy on one hand to understand what we're doing, but exactly what some of that data means really comes down to analysis. When we're talking about, for example, users submitting a form on a website and that being meaningful, what forms are we talking about? What does that form represent? Is that really true granular detail of what our individual counts and things that we're using to make predictions? What those mean is really important. And then, I think, this is always fun for the marketers to see. We put the data scientists way down at the other end of the funnel here as sort of maybe the least important part of the process for marketing data science, right? Obviously, we need some level of stringency in our modeling. but it really is worthless without these other things. So
that's coming from a data scientist too.
Yeah. I hope there are no other data scientists on the call, really, because they might kick me out of their club. Okay, it seems like Eric may have froze there for just a minute. So I'll jump in here, and so really the core of what we want to talk about here today is taking this foundation of supervised, unsupervised learning, idea of data science models, and how do we apply them to our day-to-day as marketers. So I think really the key here is we're not going to talk again about data science models at sort of a detailed technical or mathematical level. I want to speak to that marketing strategist, if we think back to the recipe slide there before, and I want to speak to, sort of how we can think about developing this kind of pipeline or use cases for machine learning. To do that, though, I will briefly talk about this idea that we all have very sort of wide, diverse tech stack marketing landscapes where we have a ton of different tools talking to each other, several inputs, outputs like marketing channels, our CMS for personalization, email. One thing that I like to mention here is that we can have models deployed in all of these different areas. And the examples that we'll go through here are models that could live in one place or another, could come from our CDP and push out to all of these other channels. That's not really where we're going to focus today. I mentioned this mostly so that we can start to think about what those applications might be, and also to say that, that idea that there's not just one super brain that does it all. We may have several models, and you may have one model for each of these channels. You may have multiple models in each of these channels. So just something to think about as we go through. All right, so that first model we'll talk about is that likelihood to purchase, something that we've mentioned here a little bit already. And we've talked about this idea that the output of a likelihood to purchase model is going to be, hey, will a user purchase or not? But what do we do with that, right? It's great to sort of have this crystal ball to understand what a user will do. But if we don't have a good application for that value, it doesn't really do much for us. Going back to that example of putting the cart before the horse, putting the machine learning model before the application here, right? So I'll start with our applications down here at the bottom to think about how we can kind of use a model like this. And one thing that we do here is think about these users who have higher likelihoods to purchase. One thing that we might do is give better or different email offers to them. Maybe anybody who's doing email marketing at scale knows that, especially for like an e-commerce website, for example, we'll have a wide range of offers that we're maybe sending people via email. And if I have users that fit within a certain threshold of likelihood to purchase, maybe I can give them a better incentive, a better discount, and that might ultimately push them a little bit further towards purchase. Another great example of taking this likelihood to purchase is to say, I have users that have a really, really high likelihood to purchase. They're my highest likelihood to purchase. It's almost sort of maybe a foregone conclusion according to the model that they will purchase. So what I might do is sort of suppress them from my ad campaigns. I don't want to spend my advertising budget on users who I believe will already have a propensity to convert and will do that anyway. So that's sort of like one of those ad optimization strategies. Another way to think about likelihood to purchase models is to think about them not as an end, but a means to another end. If we look at our last example down here, maybe we have personalization strategies where we want to take really low or medium low likelihood to convert users, serve them a unique experience that we think will benefit them or help educate them a little bit further, and move them up into more of a medium or medium high likelihood to convert a little bit later on. So I'll move into our second example here. And that's going to be another, a little bit of a different approach. Will be one of those unsupervised models that we talked about. And this is clustering users based on content categories. Kind of alluded to this a little bit when we went over the supervised versus unsupervised example. To start with, maybe our objectives here, why we might use one of these models to say, hey, I have these users that look similar. What can I do with them? Increasing engagement, shortening the path to conversion. I think these are two very, very common ones, and then also decreasing churn. And the idea here is going back to our those maybe different blog topics that users may be reading or product pages that they may be visiting. Some of the applications that we think about here, let's say that, I know that users are reading about events on my blog. So I may take those users who are reading about events and then switch out or personalize the related or recommended content on the blog. So think about on our blog, we may end or have sidebars with related content. I can give them things that will be very specific and relevant to them based on what I know that users in their cluster are reading. And I use the example here of like, okay, so these users like content about my events, so I'll serve them more content about my events. But we really would think about going beyond that with a clustering model that says, hey, there's a relationship between users who like event content and also want to see maybe content related to the newest product features or something like that, for example. Another sort of common example here of applying a model like this would be basically creating groups or segments for newsletter content, segmenting out those email recipients so that we know that users are getting the most relevant content. Our third example is another sort of unsupervised model where we're saying, okay, we don't really know what we want to predict on, but we know that we have certain inputs that could help us create meaningful clusters here again, right? And in this example, we're switching out that idea of content types and maybe blog types and page types and things like that, and swapping in things more like engagement metrics. This could be total number of emails received, total number of site visits, how long a user spends on site. And we all should have probably, based on some more sort of heuristically driven ideas of what engagement means on our websites. Hey, people who visited the website 10 times are really high engagement, or people who have been to a website 3 times over the course of 4 months are medium engaged. What an unsupervised model can help us do in this case is really to find really more complex relationships. And this is what all of these models are going to be doing to some extent, is identifying more complex relationships in those variables, in those things that we know about our users, right? So maybe there's something that says users who have visited X amount of pages and opened Y amount of emails and spent so much time on the website, but also clicked this button over here a couple of different times or watched a certain number of videos. Really what we're talking about here is complex relationships that are sort of related. And I really like the applications for a model like this as well. And this is something that we've done a few times with organizations that we've worked with. So you may sort of start to understand what frequency users want to receive emails or receive push notifications from your app, for example, based on these clusters, right? Your cluster may come out with very specific, days, number of days over the course of a month that a user may want to hear from you. Again, very similar to how we're treating and using heuristically driven audiences now, but a little bit more complex relationships based on the features that the broad, wide number of features that we can put into a model. The other example that I really like for this one in our applications is personalizing web experiences. So your engagement-based clustering model may find that you have certain groups of users who are only willing to spend so much time with your brand, right? They come back to the website frequently, but you're only getting a few page views out of them. You could customize the web experience for those users specifically to try to shorten that path to a KPI, get them to that place where you want them to get a little bit quicker. right? It's another example of how we think about engagement-based, unsupervised learning. So there's like sort of a direct antecedent to that we talked about, that I like to talk about when it comes to user clustering as well. So we've talked about clustering as being an unsupervised problem. I don't know what I'm going to do with these people. I have to find an application for these groups. There's also this idea of predicting groups or predicting clusters for known users. For this one, I'll do a little bit more of a concrete example to talk us through this one. And it's one that is particularly applicable that we've seen for example, for higher education. You may have customer data in a CRM or a CDP related to, let's say, grad students versus undergrad students, or parents versus potential students. And you may want to speak to all of these groups very differently. What machine learning could allow you to do here is say, hey, I have all of this data related to how parents, potential students, grad students, undergrad students behave throughout my website and marketing channels. So what I'm going to do is take new users who come to my website and predict which one of those buckets they may fall into based on what they're doing in their first website visit or in their first interaction on an app or something along those lines. And that would allow us to personalize those experiences and talk to them more clearly and in a more relatable manner. So some of the applications that we think about here, things that I've projects I've worked on, we've done things where we'll, for example, personalize images. Let's say, for example, a parent may be more interested in academics, so they may want to see a picture of a student in a classroom engaged in learning, versus a potential student may want to see groups of peers hanging out, and that may be more relatable content for them as they come to the website, right? Another application for these kind of, hey, I know what type of users I have on my website, so let's guess what new users would fall into, which group new users would fall into. You could re-engage users with relevant ads. You could deliver them relevant content based on the group that you think they're in. And even if we're in a case where we don't necessarily have individual content we want to send these users to based on their persona, we could at least customize that imagery, right? So we know that we're speaking to group A, so let's give group A an image in that ad that's relevant to them. The last example I'll go through here is a little bit different, but it has a really sort of broad application. So I kind of wanted to talk about it here. And it's this idea of a predictive customer lifetime value model. What this model is going to do is basically look over the whole history of purchases from users, whether that's on our website app or even in our sort of e-commerce data, to say, hey, we've looked at the frequency and amount at which users purchase, so we can take any new user who comes to your website and predict how many purchases that user will have out in the future. And the idea here is not to have some sort of reporting of total revenue or report on the total value. It's so that we can really kind of take new tools, new campaigns that we launch on our website or related to our digital marketing, and say, hey, how much value do we believe this will have in the future? To use sort of a crystal ball, right? We've acquired a new user here. How much do we think this new user will be worth in the future? And the real value here, in a very common application of a model like this, is to say, great, we just started this new prospecting campaign. Maybe it's display advertising or video advertising, for example, where we know we're not necessarily going to get a ton of sort of direct click, user clicks, purchases, everything happens all in one time. You may use this model to say, hey, we've acquired so many new users through this prospecting campaign, and our predictive lifetime value model says that they'll be worth X amount in 12 months, right? So we have this one number that says what the campaign was worth today, but we can get an idea of what it may be worth in the future, which can be really valuable. Comparing those model output long-term values, campaign to campaign, can give you a totally different picture than just sort of evaluating what your ROI on a campaign is right away.
Awesome, thank you. So one of the things I was kind of curious about is we talked about all these applications, Tyler, and like when you're marketers are hyper obsessed with data and trying to understand how, like, what the efficacy is of a different campaign, whether it could be an email, it could be a social media campaign. But if you're going to start thinking about machine learning, you want to have some level of focus and understanding on, like, how would you measure a machine learning model? And maybe this isn't something that they would be responsible for doing. But when we were talking, it seemed like it's probably something they should be aware of, that it happens, and maybe some ways that they can think about understanding how that might take place.
Yeah. So this is where I can say, you know, nobody is exempt from measurement, right? We all have to measure to some degree, right? Even as marketers, you know, analytics is all of our responsibility. But I will start here by saying that there is a clear distinction to be made between model evaluation and how we measure the application of our model output. The former here, as long as we're talking about model evaluation, I'll say that tends to be the job of a data scientist. That's sort of its own discipline, and something that's sort of far beyond the scope of what we can talk about here today. And if you're working with data scientists who are building models for you, they're probably doing that. If you're working with tools that have data science or modeling capabilities built in, there are probably data scientists sitting in the background doing that for you. When we talk about model application measurement, what we're talking about is how did the output of our model perform? And when we think about that, if we think about the output of our model as just another column in a spreadsheet, for example, just another feature or thing that we know about a user, it's really just a segment, like any other segment that we might report on. So we can really kind of think about it that simply, I think, here. To add a little bit more detail to that, I think, you know, it's important to really get a sense of what the model output looks like. And we alluded to this a little bit when we were going through the model applications, but if we go back to that likelihood to purchase example, which I like because it's just a very sort of easily addressable, simple to think about example, this might be just sort of a high-level pseudo example of what that output looks like. On the left side in white, I have a bunch of information about users in my CRM or in my CDP, for example, their status, where they are in the world, email, site visits, right? And the model output on the right here, again, just another column. And the simplest version of what a model like this would output is going to be this sort of percent or likelihood, a number between 0 and 1 that tells me how likely the user is to purchase. 1 being very likely, 0 being not likely at all. What that's going to translate to, though, for most of us in the actual model outputs that we're going to see in any reporting is going to be some translation of that number that's a little bit more meaningful. Now, this is a very simple one of high, medium, low. You may get an output that's deciles, for example, a number between 1 and 10, 10 being most likely to purchase, 1 being least likely. But really what we have now here is just 3 different segments in this example. I have users who have a high likelihood to purchase, low likelihood to purchase, or medium likelihood. And we can apply that to our reporting. So I'll start here with the, we'll go from the most data science-y kind of way to measure a model output to the most marketing kind of way to measure an output. And starting here with this idea of if our data on the left looks like, hey, I have all the user IDs, and I've converted that 0 or 1 into a simple yes, no, which is what a good model should be doing in the background. There's this idea of finding a threshold where somewhere between 0 and 1, I've said, I'm going to actually give this user a yes and think that they're more likely to purchase. What I might do here is create sort of this matrix of, hey, I've predicted the user to convert, or I've predicted the user not to convert. Did they actually convert? Did they actually not convert? So we have this sort of 2 by 2 that creates these quadrants of how my model performed. Now, this is great for a data scientist to sort of understand model performance, but it kind of removes that marketing aspect a little bit. And if you're interested in this sort of vision of how a data scientist would measure a model, this is sort of an abstracted version of what we would call a confusion matrix, which is like that 2 by 2 box of exactly that. Predicted to convert, predicted not to convert, actually did convert, actually did not convert. So that's like step number 1, right? If you really want to get a sense of how the model is doing. To take it back to more of that marketing level, though, this is something that you should be able to do with any model output that you actually are able to look at and see in reporting somewhere. You're going to have that label, and so we put that label on one axis, and then basically look at what the percentage or what the conversion rate is for users in each one of those segments. So here we're saying, oh, great, my users who had a high likelihood to converted at 68%, users with low converted at 4.21%, medium somewhere in the middle, right? So this is basically saying, cool, the model is on some level doing what it's supposed to. My users with the highest likelihood to convert are converting at a higher level. So this gives us a sense of what the model output or how the model is actually performing, in the sense of, hey, the users are doing the thing that we thought they would do. But what I think is funny about an example like this is like, all right, so 68%. What does that mean? Is that good? Is that better than if we weren't using the model? It's really kind of hard to really understand that at a deeper level, which is where I kind of push towards the gold standard, where I really like to see marketing data science models being evaluated, is with this sort of combination of marketing and data science, where we can actually say, hey, let's split test our model output. Again, gold standard, we don't always have the opportunity to do this depending on the tools that we're using, but it's something we should sort of strive for. I'm going to take I'm going to take that model output, everybody in that group, and I'm going to serve half of them whatever my application is. I'm going to give them that email that I think is more relevant to them because of the segment in or because of their likelihood to purchase. Or I'm going to serve them the site personalization because it relates back to their segment. And then I'm going to take the other half, and I'm not going to serve them that experience, a true test and control, right? A true A/B test. And in this example, we're saying, great, okay, so treatment, our test group, with our high likelihood to purchased at a much higher rate than those in the control group for that same group. So, hey, we took everybody who had a high likelihood to convert and gave some a bigger discount offer, for example, and they converted 1% higher. Same thing happened in our medium group. And let's say maybe our low group, maybe we tried to personalize the site experience for our low likelihood to purchase group to increase their likelihood. And maybe we didn't really quite hit the mark there. We need to go back and do some work on whatever we're doing to serve content to that low likelihood to purchase group to see if we can increase those conversion rates. So this is really bringing together that idea of A/B testing that marketers should be very familiar with model output, intersection of data science and marketing measurement, I think.
And a perfect timing for the intersection of data science and marketing. I wanted to talk a little bit after we kind of broke down, some of those definitions. We then talked about all those applications, and then thinking through like what that measurement aspect of it is, and then kind of bringing it together again. But for folks on the line who are maybe thinking, all right, so Tyler, this stuff sounds great. I want to unlock, or I want to quote unquote do machine learning. We've already provided some good advice for them so far, right? And what I also wanted to talk through, and we, outside of working with an organization like Bounteous on strategy, there's also some other ways to bring this into your organization. And I'm going to talk about one specific way that we actually have seen this take place. But the first is, we kind of think about this high level problem, and this is the ultimate slide for marketers, I feel like, because everyone can resonate with this one specific slide, which is I have all of these tools and I have all of these systems, and CMOs today, marketers today, they know that business is all, and they're always trying to harness their data, but it's really hard because all this data lives in different places. It's tricky to push data from one place to another. And then even if you do push it from one place to another, does that data really become unified? And does it actually integrate, or did we just create a bigger problem for ourselves? And this is something that pretty much every marketer that I talk to today is trying to overcome, which is this siloed data and incomplete data. And when it comes to something like bringing machine learning and bringing models and algorithms into your marketing strategy, if your data isn't good in the first place, the models are really only going to be able to go so far. So one of the first steps or pieces of starting and thinking about how to bring machine learning and bring some of the stuff that Tyler was talking about, apply that to your marketing strategy, is to have a really good view and insight into your customers. And this is something that a customer data platform can do. I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about ours, but I won't specifically do that today. What I really want to talk about is the value of something like a customer data platform, which is it's going to take all of these different systems that you can see here, something like CRM. It could take a BI system, e-commerce, any analytics system. We have so many of our customers today are actually integrating with CRM or even their own homegrown data lake that they've created. And what the CDP does is it ingests all this data, but then it's going to resolve and cleanse that data to provide a total 360 view of a customer. And then from that view, you're able to get some really strong analytical insights. So just better metrics, better numbers, better reports, and that's good. But when you start to apply machine learning on top of that clean view of customer, then your marketing activities can really be supercharged in a way, because you're using automation, you're using these models and algorithms to optimize the way you're reaching out to your customers, but you're also providing your business with this really strong and solid understanding of who your most valuable customers may be. And when you can combine that single view of customer with machine learning, it's something that's really, really powerful. And I know we want to get to some Q&A, so I'm going to move through most of this, but there's lots of different aspects to a CDP. You can talk about being able to share analytics and reports. We can talk about journey building, but I really want to hone in on that machine learning aspect for marketers, because when we're working through and talking through with our customers, like what they want to do in marketing, it's really, some of them have these fully fledged data science teams. They have an entire practice dedicated to data science, and some of them have no people. And for us, thinking about how to provide and deliver technology, we have to have a solution that's going to help both of those teams, right? We want data science teams to be able to enhance the activity that they're doing with whatever technology they would bring into their system. But marketers, they really want the ability to use machine learning without having to have that fully staffed data science team. Because remember, if you bring back the different team members that Tyler talked about earlier, ideally you would want to get to that point. But that doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily want or need to have a fully staffed data science team to get some value out of a clean view of your customer. And how can you automate some aspects of that? So this is where we think about machine learning for all. It's having those out-of-the-box models and clusters, being able to automatically recommend different messages, different communications, different segments, and different views of your customer that you never would have been able to do manually. But then being able to have this open framework. So like I said, we have a bunch of our different customers who they have this full staff data science team. They're doing some really amazing things. And what an open framework is going to do is allow us to take those models in and actually leverage them in the existing platform. So what's interesting here is if you're a marketer, you get these specific types of models out of the box. Now you can remember that we talked a little bit about the supervised and unsupervised learning earlier, and some of the applications, just to put a finer point out of it, like out of the box, you're able to understand someone's level of likelihood to engage or likelihood to buy or their predicted lifetime value, or being able to cluster them on specific seasons or behaviors. Maybe some of that behavior could be the different types of content that they interact with, or it could be what time of day they browse and visit, or maybe they only purchase or buy certain types of products, and you can cluster them by those different types. But then also maybe they have they're not exactly sure what their type is, so you can kind of take a couple inferences and combine that into like some type of fuzzy product cluster. But then when we get really interesting is this promise in this conversation, this goes back to what Tyler was talking about around one-to-one personalization. You're able to take these different models and then add something like what the next best product to recommend to them would be, what that next best action or channel, or even how to optimize what time of day you'd send a specific message or communication. And really quickly, I'll go through a great customer example here, but this is Moose Jaw. We work with them, really, and they're doing some really interesting, cool stuff around machine learning and just persona building in general. And so for them, what they're really focused on and interested in is, they have these customer personas. They have their weekend warriors. They have their mountain bikers. And they use that out-of-the-box persona-based cluster. They didn't have a fully staffed or full-fledged data science team. They had someone in data analytics space. And what they were able to do is then apply that likelihood model to the personas. And then they were able to dictate their entire discount strategy. So what they were able to say is, well, for customers who don't need a discount to purchase, I'm not going to send them a discount to purchase. Our weekend warriors are people who are going to buy our specific product or these specific sets of products, regardless of whether or not we send a discount. So it's only this other persona group that we really want to send out those discounts. And that was able to drastically reduce the cost to acquire an individual customer and, really help them in terms of their overall conversion rate, because they were able to convert at a higher rate, only sending the targeted messages to the right people. Now, just in closing and passing, and I'm rushing a little bit here because I do want to make sure that we have an opportunity to get to any Q&A. But, Tyler, you really, I think, put a really finer point on some of these really important definitions, helping us wade through this world of buzzwords and, from deep learning to AI to ML to supervised and unsupervised, but also practically, like, what are ways that marketers can use this stuff every single day? And then how can you, think about measuring that and understanding the efficacy of those? But to me, one of the most important things that we discussed all day today was machine learning is great. It is amazing. It can help you scale your business. It can provide you with insights you'd never be able to get without using that automation. But it's not going to matter without a good marketing strategy. If you don't, and I think you put a really good point on it, said, if you don't have a question that you want machine learning to answer, it's not going to provide you an answer. And I thought that was a really, really good way to put it. The other thing that we spoke about, and you really kind of walked through 5 specific examples, I just provided a customer one, is that this stuff has real applications for everyday marketers to help them do their jobs better. You're going to be able to achieve and gain insights that you'd never do. You'd never be able to look at millions of different records and make these inferences. And not only does machine learning tell you things that you maybe, or confirm things you already maybe knew about your customer base, but when you see that kind of that unsupervised learning that we were talking about, you're actually able to learn entirely new things about your customer base without having to have this team run through dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of different customer records and try to make those guesses themselves. And the last is that using something like a customer data platform or using someone like a Bounteous is one way to help unlock machine learning across your business. With a CDP specifically, it's going to help solve that all my data lives everywhere, and I can't figure out how to get it in one specific place, and then to cleanse that and optimize it. So those are kind of our key takeaways. I hope this was helpful in terms of an overarching, I really like where we started and thinking through some of the most common ways to define machine learning. I hope we helped wade through some of that messaging and kind of different posts and everyone saying that they can do it, working through some of that stuff, but then really getting into the practical applications of how machine learning can help marketers every single day. If we have some questions, I'm happy to take them. But, Tyler, for me, I wanted to say thanks, because not only do I think a lot of people on this call probably learned a lot about machine learning, but just from our conversations, as a marketer who knows about machine learning but doesn't really know machine learning, it was really helpful for me to get a sense of some of this at just a deep enough level where I felt like I understood what we were talking about, and also knowing there's a lot more to it.
That's great. Yeah, always leave them wanting a little bit more, right?
Exactly.
Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for taking some of the mystery and scariness out of machine learning for a lot of people. That was fantastic. We're just about out of time, but I'm hoping we can get to 2 key things that I'm seeing with questions both here and on social. One is around how to prioritize, what to tackle first, and essentially just how to get started. I mean, what's the advice? How to get started here, and where should the priorities be?
Yeah, I think that's a really common question. And I think, when we think about how to build out this strategy and really start down this road, it's a start wide and then narrow, right? So let's find our broadest challenges, our most applicable questions to our broadest swatch, like broadest group of users, I guess I would say. And then from there, we can take that one model that applies to everyone and then segment and split that model off into several different, hey, cool. Like, let's look at, again, likelihood to purchase, because that applies to everybody. And then we can look at likelihood to cross-sell or upsell, or likelihood to purchase an individual product or a higher tier product or something like that. So starting broad and then narrowing in and refining. Remember, it's maturity. We're growing along. Everybody's going to continue moving along that path.
And I can just add to that just really quickly, but some of our customers, they were really specific about the type of question that they wanted answered. So for one of our customers, it was, I really want to know who my most valuable customers are. They weren't actually able to access that in the way that all their data, all their analytics, all their repositories, because just because someone says they want to be part of a loyalty program doesn't mean that they're actually loyal or that they're their most valuable to you. So in this specific instance, I want to know who my most valuable customers are over the course of a 3-year period. And then I want to be able to understand what their likelihood to respond to a specific communication is so I can engage with them more effectively. Another example was, I really want to gain insight into my omni-channel customers, so people that go in-store and are also online, and that they wanted machine learning to help answer that, and also try to predict what they were likely to do next so that they could flow in that journey that they were naturally going to take and help enhance that journey. So I've got dozens of those examples. I know in the interest of time, I won't go through them all, but those are just some specific ways in machine learning can help provide the answer if you help provide the question. And that's what they were looking for.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we're out of time, but folks, if we did not answer your question, don't worry. We're going to share all the questions with Tyler and Eric, and we'll make sure we do. I appreciate that you both talked about the need for content strategy, for marketing strategy as a key factor here. Big believers here at CMI on that, and something we'll be talking a lot about at our upcoming Content Tech Summit in June. Would love to have you all join us if you can. Just contact me for any details if you'd like. We're so thankful to both of you for sharing your expertise today. Thank you for Acquia for making this happen. I feel like we're just getting started on these great conversations and examples, and I hope we can share more in the future. So this has been fantastic. Thank you all. Reminder to the audience too that we will send you a link to the on-demand version tomorrow. There was a lot to take in. My notes are many pages right now, so I'm sure yours are too. So if you need to watch it again, feel free to do so. Eric and Tyler, thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks. It's our pleasure.